Here we go. My name's Todd.
This is Cathy.
Welcome back to another episode of Zen Parenting Radio. This is podcast number 724. Why listen to Zen Parenting Radio? Because you'll feel outstanding. There goes my voice. And always remember our motto, which is the best predictor of a child's well-being is a parent's self-understanding. On today's show, we have a good friend of ours. Her name is Millie Shee. I'm going to give you some applause, Millie. And I just told Millie about 7 minutes ago that she was going to be at our podcast. So she's completely unprepared. But Cathy and I decided, Millie is a friend. We first met you at the Zen Parenting Conference. Were you at the first one?
Not the first one.
Shefali?
I was part of the Kickstarter campaign.
Okay.
So I've been listening to you guys since like 2 years in.
Yeah.
So how long?
So that is 11 years.
Yeah. So Millie's been with us probably as long as almost anybody.
Yes. And she's part of Teen Zen, which is our virtual community.
So OG member.
Yes, absolutely. Read that thing that I sent you.
Oh, yeah.
Millie, I think we came up with a way to describe Teen Zen.
This is our new thing. Join the Circle, which is the Team Zen membership platform. It's an app with Zen Parenting Radio's complete parenting content collection plus live talks all in one place.
Our complete parenting content collection, because Millie, so Millie's on Team Zen, like she said, she's been around forever. And we struggle to explain Team Zen because there's just a lot of little things on it that people, it's hard to explain in a soundbite because obviously we have all the live talks, which, you are part of. Mm-hmm. And then, but we also have these micro communities, and you are a part of those too. So I'm totally putting you on the spot. Don't kill me. But
what's your favorite part of it? Or one or your two favorite parts of Team Zen?
Oh, the community.
Oh, really?
I mean, just the access to that community. Mm-hmm. I mean, access to you guys, of course.
Yeah.
But just having this like-minded community that becomes another type of family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have become close to some of these members, right?
Yes.
We've met, at conferences and such.
And you participate in some of the micro communities, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So there's the micro communities within the larger community.
Right.
So you're asking I have to say the community and the fact that Circle now encompasses all of it. Mm-hmm. I can go to that one spot, either on my app or online, and get in touch with the people or find content. It's fantastic. So thank you for putting a Circle together.
Thank you. Well, we're glad you're part of it. And you're a leader in the community. So we really appreciate you, Millie. So
as far as calendar goes, I just want to say we do have some things coming up that might be interesting. We have a Differently Wired Families hosted by Millie Shee on August 25th.
And Nikki Smith.
And Nikki Smith. Thank you, Nikki, our New Zealand friend. Mm-hmm. There is a separation divorce one on August 27th. And on August 31st, we're welcoming Devorah Heitner. And she's the author of Growing Up in Public, Coming of Age in a Digital World and Screen Wars.
Yeah, that's like the other part that we would never say. Well, we may say it sometimes, but we always, every month, we have someone come on, an author or an expert or, somebody who's in the parenting world, and they come in and do like a Q&A for everybody. And they're friends of ours, sometimes we're meeting them for the first time. But last month we had Hunter Clark Fields, who has a new book. And then this month we have Devorah. So,
and many more to come.
There's and like Millie said, it's just nice that it's on the app. Honestly, for me too, Millie, because we were struggling for a while with Team Zen, because we're like, how do we access everybody in one place? We're sending emails, we're using Facebook. So it's better now, isn't it?
1,000 times.
Yeah.
1,000 times.
And the fact that we can get off
the
Facebook.
resource, that is the resource. I've told people about Zen Parenting Radio. I'm like, now you just go to this one place. It's your one-stop shop.
And we did not bring Millie in to talk about Team Zen. We actually I'm bringing a topic to the table, and I thought Millie would be a good person to have the topic with, even though you don't even know what it is that we're about to talk about, which is fine.
It's like, no pressure.
No pressure.
I literally came over just to say
hi
to you because I'm going to be in town.
Yes.
That's what I'm laughing about. She literally said, hey, I happen to be in Oak Park. Should I, can I come over and see you guys? We're like, sure. And then we're like, hey, we're doing a podcast.
Yeah,
come on.
Jump in.
So
timing was perfect.
So if you visit us, you're forced to podcast. Our girls will attest.
Yes.
Because
very aware.
But first, sweetie, you wrote a Zen parenting moment.
Yes.
And I ordinarily probably wouldn't include it, but you started with a quote.
A lyric.
A lyric.
Yes.
There it is. What did you write about, and why did you include this song?
Well, I wrote about two things. I wrote about the fact that I do not like back to school time, and I never have. If you've been listening to Zen Parenting Radio for the last 13 years, or maybe even just 2 or 3 of the last 13 years, I am not a fan of this transition. I love fall. And once I transition, I'm a fan of where we are. But this shift from summer to fall has always been very emotionally difficult for me. And this year has been a doozy because my middle daughter, we dropped her off at college on Wednesday. And I had a lot of anticipatory anxiety going into it. I think I started talking to my therapist about this in April. And I really, it's a hard, I always describe it for people as a tunnel you have to go through, where I know she's going to be okay. And I'm totally at peace with where she is in life. She's a very mature, responsible woman. And I know she's ready to go to school. It's not about that. It's about that I'm going to miss her. It's a shift.
Yeah.
And you can't be super psyched for them until you go through that tunnel of grief.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I think it's more extreme when your kids are going to college or moving out or doing whatever they're doing, working, moving to a new state, I think it's also hard when your kid goes to kindergarten. I think it's hard when they go to middle school. I think it's difficult when they go to high school. And then it's really difficult when they become seniors because you realize it's their last year. I know I'm not alone in this tunnel. I think there's a lot of us parents in there, but it's so emotionally, it's been a lot of work. And so I think in the last 2 days, you would probably say I've been better. Wouldn't you say?
Very much so. And just so everybody knows, we're going to be talking about anxiety today.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you guys, I'm going to deliver a message I heard from Jack Cornfield, and I broke them up into these bite-sized clips, and we're going to be talking about each of the 30-second clips.
Okay.
All right. So it's in terms of anxiety. But first, Millie, can you share how many kids you have and ages and all that stuff?
I have 3, 16-year-old daughter going to be a junior in high school. And then I have twin 11-year-old boys who will be going to middle school for the first time. So yeah, I hear you on the anxiety.
Yes.
This is the first time they're going to be going to school, going to different classes, and
it's just
having
different
teachers. A whole bunch of different teachers. It's different. Yeah.
And I think that kind of where it's never about, will they make it? Because of course they will, and we'll figure it out. It's that we have to look at things different. We have to pay more attention. The thing that I was really talking to Todd about a lot is I had a big grief thing about being a mom, in that I have always felt that I am the last line of defense for my kids. And whenever I would talk to people about my daughter's going to college, they'd be like, she's going to do great. She's going to be great. She is. But I'm the one who has to pay attention to that. So everybody's depending on me. They're like, well, if anything went wrong, you would help her or whatever, but that falls on me. Now, Todd, would sometimes get frustrated with me because he's like, well, I am paying attention too, which you are, by the way. It was never a slight on Todd. Like, I was never like, you don't do anything, I do it all. That was never my point. It was that it feels daunting, just like your sons are going to middle school. You have to pay attention. How is it different? How are they reacting? And it's this hypervigilance that I'm not a huge fan of. And when you've been a parent for 20 years, which we have now, you realize that hypervigilance has been like on full blast for 2 decades. Yeah. And it's when I say tiring, I don't mean like I'm over it. It's my work as a mom. But sometimes I'm like, oh my God, plus the grief of her leaving, plus the grief of her friends leaving and all these important people to her. It's just, it's intense.
For sure. And you're on the front lines in a way that I'm not.
That's how it feels.
And you're the last line of defense. Yeah. So like, I don't know the military metaphor, I don't know if it's working, but you are the safety net.
Yes.
And you're also the one
who's grieving the thing
doing a
happening.
lot of the
Yes.
heavy work. But if I were to like say, what's the most frequent topic that we've talked about in all the Zen talks or even on the podcast? I don't want to necessarily talk about your maybe we'll use your specific example as we go through these clips, but just anxiety in general. Like, I don't remember having discussions in the 1980s and 90s about anxiety.
No.
And then somehow this word became mainstream, and I suffer from it. I judge that most people suffer from it. We all have a different relationship with it, but it's like the most prevalent issue I think that we hear about.
And can I just, I'll be on your case about words, as I always am. Instead of I suffer with it, I experience it, and I know what it is.
Well, I think there's times when I suffer from it.
Yeah.
And there's sometimes I experience it. And we'll talk a little bit about that. All right.
Okay.
So Jackie Cornfield was interviewed by a guy named Tim Ferriss, who's got a really famous podcast called The Tim Ferriss Show. And he breaks down, he's telling Tim about how he would advise somebody who has a hard time, I'll say, suffering from anxiety. Okay.
Okay.
And
do you want to tell any more about Jack Cornfield? Because
he's like a meditation guru. He's like one of the most famous ones still alive, right? As far as when I think of guys who are most into meditation, he's probably top on my list.
And he trained as a Buddhist monk.
Yeah.
Like he, not only does he have the experience, and I think he, as you said, he was someone who brought, all of this to the Western world.
Yeah.
One of the many teachers. We had that like big influx of teachers who came, and brought meditation and to the West, John Kabat-Zinn and, but
he was probably one of the first ones I actually listened to.
Cornfield or
Cornfield.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I just want to invite anybody listening to think about something that they're either anxious about right now or that they have really been anxious about in the past. Okay. So like listen to Jack's words through your own lens, because I think and I don't think any of the things that he's about to share isn't things that we haven't said on this podcast over the last 12 years, but he says it in a concise way that I think it's like somebody might take this podcast and literally like write it down and use it next time they feel overwhelmed with anxiety. Okay.
Got it.
Are you ready? So this first clip is about 30 seconds. And just so you know, he uses this term called Mara because he's talking about this whole old Buddha story. And in this case, Mara represents anxiety.
Yes,
okay?
Mara. Mm-hmm.
Do you know who Mara is?
Yeah, I know the story.
Is well enough to say anything about it or no?
No, but I remember a podcast I was listening to about that a lot of people name their children. That's a girl's name, Mara. And that so you play this and then I'll look it up so I can give you a really good.
All right. So here's the first 30 seconds. So Tim's saying, how do we, Jack Cornfield, teach us how to deal with anxiety better?
Is that you, Mara, or I see you, Mara? And Mara looks and kind of sadly slinks away, if you will. So the first thing about anxiety is to acknowledge that it's entirely human, that there are cultural reasons for it, and that there are physiological reasons, that we have fear and we have fear of loss and all of those things. And to be able to name it and say, oh, this is anxiety. It feels this way in my body. Your hands sweat, your breath stops, your heart. And it's hard to feel. It's unpleasant in the body. And then it has its thoughts. We'll get to those in a minute. And what you can do in naming Mara, you can say, oh, anxiety, I see you. I feel you.
All right. Step one.
So to backtrack really quick, in Buddhism, Mara was represented as a malignant celestial king who tried to stop Prince Siddhartha, so, Buddha, from achieving enlightenment by trying to seduce him with his army and a vision of beautiful women who in various legends are often to be Mara's daughters.
Got it.
So it's like a,
The temptation.
Yes, a temptation or just holding us kind of hostage mentally. So
what I love about this first clip is that he's like, Jack is inviting us to name it. And for me, that's like a separation, because when I feel really anxious, I feel like I am anxiety. Mm-hmm. I'm overwhelmed by this feeling, and there is no discernment between Todd or, the essence of who I am and anxiety. It's just anxiety. There is no Todd. It's just anxiety. Okay. What do you guys have any thoughts about the power in just naming it?
I was just going to say, don't some experts suggest, especially with younger kids, to have them name this worry monster
Mhm.
and give it a name.
Yeah.
So that it is something they can then separate from themselves, as you say.
Yep.
Fred,
Yeah.
my worry monster. Oh, he's here.
Mhm.
And this is how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And
Because of Fred.
to draw it,
Draw
what
it,
does
yep.
Fred look
Mhm,
like?
mhm.
And these are all things that we can do with kids when they're younger, so they really see it as separate from themselves. But then the next layer is, do you think Fred is trying to hurt us, or do you think Fred is trying to help us?
Well, we're gonna get into that.
Oh, okay.
Don't worry about it.
Mhm.
Okay.
But I appreciate, Millie, your prompt about naming it. But I also want to just say this is not a kid thing. Like as an adult, like I should, and maybe the name of my anxiety is simply anxiety, or it could be anxious Al or something like that. But I think, plus he also said in that clip that it's human, it's physiological, right? But it's also cultural. And I think the physiological is a normal piece. And the cultural is, all the other baggage that comes around the way something is supposed to be.
So cultural meaning that we get anxious because something doesn't show up the way the
Yeah.
culture says it should.
Yeah.
We're not achieving a certain way. We're not.
Yeah, I feel like the cultural is the baggage, whereas the physiological is, there's a threat out there,
Yeah.
and it's making my palms sweaty or something like that.
Mhm.
And then I also love the fact that he's like, notice of how it shows up in the body, and it's unpleasant.
Well, that's what I wanted to focus on. So I something that is frustrating to me, because it's the truth and because I struggle talking about it with people, is that when you are sad, or you are, and again, anxiety can have different levels, as can
Right.
sadness.
And we could talk about, you could insert sadness, anger, frustration with things. It doesn't matter what
Right.
we're talking about.
Well, and we try not to ever say negative emotions, because that's not true. All emotions have purpose, but the emotions that are harder to feel,
Yeah.
the ones in our bodies that
Less
kind of make us go,
comfortable.
huh, like this is not comfortable. When people tell me, they'll be like, yeah, I was really sad, but I took a deep breath and I moved through it. I'm like, well, then I don't think you were sad. You were maybe had a moment of, I'm not saying they weren't sad. That's not fair, but sad hurts, and anxiety is uncomfortable. And when you're in the midst of it, there's not a lot of higher thinking going on in the midst of it. Now you can have a good practice of, now that I'm feeling this way, I know I need to take a walk, or I know I need to sit, or I know I need to have a big drink of water. Like, I'm not saying your brain shuts down, but I think we try and breeze through these things that are just literally uncomfortable. Like, we were just talking about Cameron leaving, and I was not well. I also knew that it made sense why I was not well. I wasn't nervous, and I also have struggled, historically I've had depression, and I've had anxiety that felt unfounded. And that can be even more difficult, because you're like, I don't know what to connect this to. But in this situation, I understood, but it's not like I was like, yes. And then there was some, a beautiful moment. Like, it sucked. And it took talking to her one day where I was like, oh, I feel like there's some stability, where I was able to take a breath, and I'm still feeling that way. It's just not as heavy.
Well, when we were on the car ride home after we dropped off our kid at school,
I was comatose.
You were crying a lot.
Right. Yes.
So you were feeling those uncomfortable feelings.
Yes.
Right.
And I don't know, Millie, are you a crier? We cried a lot during milk together, but I don't.
I just looked right there. I can't.
I know,
I literally just went back to that conference.
I know.
I cried a lot. I'm not a crier, maybe quite as much as you, but
Yeah.
I definitely can be set off fairly easily.
And there's different cries, because there is. So what I just said to Millie is, about 4 conferences ago, we had a singer-songwriter named Milk, which people may know her now. She's become a lot more famous, come to our conference and sing. And I think the whole room was sobbing, because it was so of the time and so poignant and so personal. And somehow we were all her story, even though her story was so unique. And she sings this song, I Can't Keep Quiet. And we have a sign in our podcast room that says, I can't keep quiet, that Millie is facing.
Just a little clip there.
Can't keep quiet. She's amazing.
Out of all the amazing people we've had at the conference, hers was by far the most impactful?
Impactful. It's surprising.
Yeah.
Like I knew she'd be great. I had seen her at a conference before, which is how I met her. So I knew she was going to like, but I was like, geez, like I'm getting goosebumps right now.
I mean,
Yeah. What was your experience of Milk?
When she told her story, I related to her story just personally as a Chinese American. We literally had very similar experiences. I mean, not some of the traumatic maybe experiences that she had, but so there was that. You know, I related to her on that front. But her music, I mean, I knew the I Can't Keep Quiet piece, but when she sang some of the other ones, there was one I remember. It had to. She wrote about her dad. I think it was right, and how you did the best that you could, that you knew how, kind of thing. I lost it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm getting teary-eyed just thinking about it because
I think it was called Black Sheep. Was it called Black Sheep?
You know, I don't remember what it's called.
Neither do I.
I just remember that lyric of how they are parents. We right now just do the best that we can and that we know how.
Yeah.
And so I think when I look back at how my parents parented me, I have to have compassion.
Yes.
And if we have the awareness, we can take the good that we want to take from what they taught us. And then the things that we didn't care so much for, we can set it aside. And sometimes it comes out still because it's part of me already. And I have to, be self-aware enough to know that, okay, wait, you don't want to do that to your kids. And because you remember, don't you, Millie, you know, how you felt when you were parented that way. Okay. But again, the compassion, like we're all doing the best that we can and that we know how.
So step one, thank you for sharing, by the way, Millie. Step one was to name it. Step two, we're about to listen to.
So that's the first thing. And already you start to step halfway back from it as the witness. So that already begins to liberate you a little bit. And then the next thing is you can also say, thank you for trying to protect me. Because if you fight against the anxiety, what that is more anxiety. Oh my God, I got rid of it. I hate it. But instead, it's almost like you take a little bow. Okay, Mara, I see you. Thank you for trying to protect me, because that's what it's trying to do. And you remember that statement from Mark Twain, where he said, my life has been filled with terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened, right? So these are the stories. You meant sort of the advanced stories. Say, thank you, Mara. I see you. Thanks for trying to protect me.
How many of us say thank you for the anxiety? I don't know. I certainly don't, but I think it's an important step to work through the anxiety. I think it's so important. Like, think about it. It's so paradoxical. Why would you thank this uncomfortable feeling in my body? But that's the only way to move through it, I think.
Well, you know, remember we used to talk many, many years ago about emotional vomit?
Yes.
You know, I used to, you know, because that was so, for me, it really captured not only for our kids when they're, and again, for anybody who's new to listening, emotional vomit is just basically when you have all these emotions and they come out in a strong way. If it means that you like have a big cry, or if it's that you get really angry, whatever, you're just releasing, because if you see emotions as energy and they're moving through your body, they have to go somewhere. So I have a really good, you know, emotions as a body work experience really helped me, because the reason why anxiety and sadness are so uncomfortable for me is I know I'm going to have to throw up.
Yeah.
And that I don't look forward to it. Just like people don't look forward to throwing up. It's uncomfortable. You're choked. You're out of control, and nobody looks forward to that. Like, so when I just remember a couple nights before my mom passed away, I remember being like, okay, you know, my mom was not in good shape at the end. So there is a sense of relief for her, right? There's relief, and there is, you know, a moving forward and everything. But why I couldn't sleep is I'm like, the amount of emotional, like there's so many layers I have to go through now, you know, so much emotional vomit, and we don't get to control grief. We don't get to control anxiety.
No.
It comes up when it comes up. So
that's a problem. We start to try to control it.
Right. But when it comes up, sometimes we're not in a space to have that experience of letting it out, and we have to contain it for the moment, which can make it uncomfortable. Sometimes it surprises us. And then Todd, I think you would say you get anxious when you don't get anxious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something's supposed to be happening and it's not happening.
Yeah.
I try to control my emotions. Like I'm supposed to be sad right now. I'm supposed to be angry right
Yeah.
now. I'm supposed to be joyful right now.
Yeah. So you get
So
anxious.
then I get jacked up about not having feelings, which
Yeah.
is a feeling.
What's your thing or things, Millie? What's the thing that makes you most anxious? Can you tap into that it with a word or an experience?
The thing that makes me most anxious, probably like you, Todd, my inability to control something.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it usually has to do with my kids.
Yeah.
Right. Lack of control.
Lack of control.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And you know what? I think so. Just to kind of put our stories together, the thing I was talking about, front line of defense as a mom, and dropping Cameron off at school, and I haven't even grieved. My older daughter is going to Italy on Saturday. I'm like taking grief one step at a time here. I have someone else to say goodbye to. And I think that is what I'm experiencing is I can't control all this anymore. And I got to watch them. And kind of like I visualize myself with, the balance beam thing.
Yeah.
We always talk about this balance beam idea that when our kids are little, they're on a balance beam, we hold their hand. But then as they get older, we have to back up and let them be unbalanced and fall.
This week and last week, we've had to take multiple steps backwards.
I'm almost in a different room.
Yeah, you're in a different room.
I'm still trying to watch them on the balance beam because I don't want them to ever think support isn't available.
Yeah. And even though you've shared with them a bazillion times, and support is available.
As my therapist would say, Cathy, do they come to you and they're struggling? Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So let's check that off the list.
The but is
you're trying to tell your cellular memory, your nervous system to do something that's hard.
Correct.
That's your automatic response.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So auto. And did you, Millie, when you struggled as a kid, did you tell your parents?
Oh, no.
See, neither did I.
No way.
So we're also working off of, I didn't.
Yeah. And
I was alone. And again, this is all very, Millie and I love our parents. It's not about they weren't there for us. It's about we didn't have that kind of, it was a different time.
Mm-hmm.
So then when I'm watching one of my girls struggle, I'm running it through my system and I'm thinking they probably feel alone right now. Right. They probably feel like but that's my system.
Sure.
I did things a different way with them where they feel, and they don't just go to me, they go to my best friend, they go to my sister, they go to you, they go to my aunt, like they have multiple outlets, but it's hard to feel that. I only feel myself.
Yeah. Well, and then that's probably you're in your, not to go too deep, but that's your inner child.
Correct.
Somewhere, right?
Yeah.
You ready for step 3?
Well, first, Millie, did you have anything else to say about step 2? Because I see you write things down.
Well, no, it's I love that. Thank you for trying to protect me. Well, that is acknowledgement right there, but also that's in a way gratitude, kind of spinning it in a way that, how was I trying to say this? That there is a role, that you're acknowledging that there is a role for that anxiety be happening to you right now. Right. And it is a positive role, right? Because it's trying to protect you.
Yeah.
So you just sort of spun this negative feeling.
It just reframes
reframes it to sort of something positive. So,
all right,
that's how it's done.
Step 3.
Then the next thing is to know that there's something called the wisdom of insecurity, that it's actually okay to be insecure. My monastic teachers would say it's uncertain, isn't it? We could ask them all kinds of things. Tell me about enlightenment. My teacher would laugh. He said, it's uncertain, isn't it? He wanted us just to get comfortable with uncertainty. And then what happens is when you realize that you can't know, that you come back into the present moment.
All right. So he talks about the wisdom of insecurity. What I got out of that section was just an acceptance of you talk about control, Millie, an acceptance that this is something that I'm experiencing right now and that it's okay that I'm experiencing it. That's what I got out of it.
Well, and that our control, when we want to control, we believe that we can make things certain and we don't have that power. I mean, I always forget the subtitle in my book, caring caring for ourselves and our children in an unpredictable world. So I use the word unpredictable, not uncertain, but they're somewhat synonymous in that I was really at the heart of that book during COVID, writing it. I mean, so that makes sense.
Talk about
unpredictable.
uncertainty.
Yeah. And the truth is everything is uncertain. You can you can have the best laid plan and be so organized and have everything color coded and do everything. And there is no guarantee that it will end up a certain way. And you can also drop the ball in a million ways and things might go linear and according to plan. So, but that's super uncomfortable, I think, for everybody.
Yeah.
But it's also so heightened in parenting because I bet, Millie, in the workforce, you were very organized.
Oh, extremely.
Right.
And I still remember that the best piece of advice that a girlfriend who was a parent, gave me when I became a parent or before I became a parent was, you need to learn to be flexible.
Understand.
And let go of that control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you knew going in that you were going to have that to contend with. You hadn't felt it yet.
No,
right.
No, but I was given that wisdom.
Yeah. Your brain knew, but it's one thing for the brain to know. It's nothing to be able to do what the brain knows.
Yeah.
Are you a 1 on the Enneagram?
I'm a 1 wing 2.
1 wing 2. That makes sense.
That's what I've tested to be.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, Enneagram 1, sometimes they call it the perfectionist, but I don't really like that word. How would you describe a 1? Just there's an organization to it.
Well, unfortunately, I do use the perfectionist. I don't like to label it that anymore. I say I have a perfectionistic tendency.
Got it. Like it. I like it.
Well, and then to bring it back to Jack Kornfield, what's the word you just used? Is the perfectionism. That's a part of you, right? So we could talk about anxiety or we could talk about your need to be perfect, but you should probably be thanking that one for wanting to be perfect because it's trying to protect you. Like we can use this in any version of ourselves that shows up, I think.
Well, interesting you say that because I have now learned, say, just with the topic of perfectionism, there's perfectionism that gets you going, that helps you, and then maladaptive perfectionism.
Right.
Oh yes, for sure. All of these can be maladaptive.
Right. So
yeah.
And Millie, I mean, again, I don't know, we've known each other a long time, but I know just a little about your history. There was probably an expectation, not necessarily for you to be perfect, but to achieve. Right.
Oh,
so,
sure.
So there was the perfectionism is also about, for many of us, like, I have to be this thing or whatever that is. It could be grades. It could be, a sport. It could be whatever, because that's what keeps me safe, because that's what keeps me loved.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the perfection that often is coming up in adulthood was helpful to us. I'm putting this in air quotes. It could have been difficult for us as a kid, but we felt it was helping us because we felt like it was helping us get love. But then we're using it in adulthood maybe to get love, and it doesn't work.
And
anymore.
I have my example of that.
Sure.
My parents used to fight, as I've shared on this podcast a million times, argue, and I used to get really scared and it was really uncomfortable. So the only way for me to deal with it as an 8-year-old boy was to shut down, to not emote. Now I'm 51 and there's plenty of opportunities for me to emote, yet I'm still behaving as if I open up, I will die. Like I couldn't handle it when I was 8 years old. So there's still this 8-year-old boy in me that's being stoic, being non-emotional because he thinks he'll die. So that one is like the 8-year-old boy is scared and is driving the bus when in fact there's this 51-year-old version of myself that knows that I'm completely safe to emote in front of my wife, my daughters, to be angry, to be sad, to be afraid. And I have a hard time, even though I know it, I have a hard time experiencing it.
Well, just a slight tangent
Sure.
from that for about you is because I was having so much emoting for the last couple of weeks, and Todd, you weren't frustrated with me about the emoting, but some of the things I was saying.
Sure.
And he was like, no, I'm here. But then when he would give me, it wasn't really advice, but support. I a few times said, that's not helpful to me. And then his mentality is, well, if this doesn't help you, then I'm going to stop talking.
I'm just going to shut down.
And I'm like, well, my comeback, it sounds like but what I said to him is, it's okay that what you just said didn't help me, But instead of shutting down, maybe be curious about why it didn't help.
Right.
Like say, oh, that didn't help. So was it the words? Was it did it make you feel more stressed? Like, what would be helpful right now?
So what happens to me in that moment, because I remember exactly where we were. We were up in the bedroom.
Yeah.
I said something, it didn't land well. You're like, well, that doesn't land well. I shut down. If I'm being honest, what happens to me in that moment, my scared animal shows up.
Right.
Like I just get really scared. So when I get scared, I shut down. And your invitation, which is a good one and something that I want to keep working on, is like, instead of getting scared and shutting down, Todd, why don't you lean in and get more curious about, okay, let's talk about what I just said didn't land well and how it landed with you. But instead I'm like, I'm out.
Or shift the version. The big shift was, instead of thinking about what can I say so I didn't say the right thing. Well, what's another thing I could say? What's another thing I could say? My thing is shift away from what you want to say and shift toward, what do I need to hear? So you're becoming curious about me. I think, and again, looking at Millie, I think women are really good at this. I think women are constantly, and again, I'm being very general. I think men can be good at this as well. But I think we're always investigating. Oh, I said something, it didn't land well. What happened there? Or we sometimes text later and say, oh, I didn't let you talk enough, did I? We're constantly noticing what the other person is experiencing generally. And I think sometimes you were like, but yeah, what can I say that is helpful versus what did she, it's like this very subtle shift.
It's a little weird though, because I honestly thought what I was saying was something that you needed to hear. Now it was the opposite of what you needed to hear, but I wasn't thinking, what do I need to say here? I honestly was trying to say things that would help you.
Oh, of course.
Right.
Yeah. You always do. You're good. You're
like,
good.
I'm not usually not saying things to harm, but I don't know. I have chosen not to take that next step and lean in the way you asked.
Right.
And that's something I want to do.
Well, and one more thing. Sorry, Millie. We're having this side commentary here. This is, remember when you were saying, when we sit around at a table of the girls, our family, the five of us, and sometimes Todd can't get a word in because we're very talky. And we're like, yes, and this, and this, and this. And Todd's like, I always want to make a point and I can't because there's no space. So I said, instead of feeling the need to make a point, ask a question about what someone just said. So we don't need any more input from you in that moment. And if you really notice the conversation we're having, we're not necessarily bringing in new information. JC will say, and then I went to this place, and I'll say, what was it like? And then she'll say, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what did it feel like? Like, I'm still curious about the things she brought in. I'm not bringing in anything new to the conversation.
But sweetie, then I'm depriving you guys of all my wisdom.
Okay.
All right. We ready for step 4?
Okay.
Step
side
4.
combo.
And then the next thing to do with anxiety is ground your senses. Feel your feet on the floor, or maybe go out in nature, stand there with a tree, feel the roots of the tree, and imagine your own feet as roots into the earth. And notice the wind comes and the storms and all those things happen, but the tree is rooted and it can stay there, and you can be the same. You can let the storms of thoughts and fears and so forth arise. So that's another practice you can do.
How many of us do something like that when we're being paralyzed with anxiety? I don't. I mean, I usually don't.
I don't either.
It seems so.
I think it's super. And if I can discipline myself to do that, I think it would be so helpful. But when I'm in it, I can't remember. My brain shuts down. I'm in the reptilian brain, right?
So what do you do? I'm looking at.
Oh, I'm with you. I know intellectually that that's what I should do.
Yeah.
Just ground. I don't have to even go outside necessarily, just to pause and be present and ground. But I don't. I just, I try to get through and survive that moment.
Yeah.
And then later on, I might, remember to go and ground.
Yeah, I think it's a big, I think, like, I'm hearing him, and he's Jack Kornfield, so I believe him that he does that. I'm not questioning, but that's something that I would hear a coach say to someone, and I would be like, do you do that?
Yeah, I know.
Because it sounds
a hard
so
ask.
teachy. It sounds so like, it's like when someone's like, you're really upset, take a deep breath and you'll feel better. It's true, but it's a big ask. And I feel like it becomes so. What I will say, I think if we can get a piece of that, like something that I do, and again, I think this is about me having an understanding of the energy that's moving through my body when I'm sad or anxious, is that I may not go ground and do the whole yogic thing and
Yeah.
become a tree, but I do go outside
Mhm.
and I do. So like, even
Yeah.
as Todd,
And I'm
will-
sure Jack would say, yeah, you're doing that.
like do, or I'd roll down the window. Like if someone sneezes in our car, I roll down the window because I feel like there's an energy that needs to move. Someone just released something big and I don't want it in the car. Now everybody thinks I'm nutty, or they're like, look, mom's going to roll down the window, but the girls do it without me now too.
Yeah.
So-
I'm done thinking you're nutty because we've been doing this a long time.
But doesn't that make sense? Like if someone sneezes in the car, don't you want to release that? I mean, I'm looking at Millie. I'm putting her on the
Do
spot.
you roll down the window?
I
if
have
somebody-
not done that
Yeah.
yet, but I just might start doing it. But I will, if someone, I mean, especially now in the day of COVID, but if someone releases anything,
Right.
I do notice, and I do shift myself.
Yes.
Literally.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
don't know.
we become more conscious of that,
Yeah,
right?
we're
Like
very conscious of it.
we are like, did you wash your hands? And,
Yeah.
you know, people aren't wearing masks like they did, but there is a sense of coughing and sneezing has a different component. I've always viewed it as obviously germs.
Mhm.
That's the basic scientific level, but I also view it as being energetic. It's emotion. It's like something you're letting go of. And I don't really want to absorb that back in.
Well, what I'm realizing because I listen to this podcast, I'm like, this is really good. And the reason I think I like it is because the way I like to learn is step by step.
Yeah.
And the way you like to learn is like, I like bullet points. Cathy likes paragraphs. That's the best way I can describe it. So this is like a framework. And I'm just like realizing as Jack is sharing his version of wisdom with us, like part of me is like, I want to write this on a Post-it note. And next time I'm feeling anxious to do all these step-by-step things. And I don't think you would ever do anything like that, right, sweetie? Like write it down on a Post-it note so that you could remember how to do it.
It would be next to 80 other Post-it notes
Yeah.
about how to do it.
Right.
It's an integration of a lot of different things. So
Right.
no, I don't go, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. That's too schooly for me. I'd feel like I'm following someone else's pattern,
Yeah.
but I would put it in the back of my mind. Like, ooh, like there's sometimes things I've heard that have soothed me so much in a moment that, you know, like I'll be really feeling like the one thing that really soothed me, and I have it everywhere, it's from years ago, but is about fear being like part of your darkness that you are so grateful for and that you want to hug and get to know it.
Mhm.
And we can say that about anxiety too, Mara.
Sure.
That's kind of the whole point. But there was something, I have pictures in this office, up in my room, and in the other office where Smokey is, that say that with little, like with a person hugging their fear, like
Yeah.
because this could sound so stupid, but fear scares me.
Mhm.
Do you know what I
Sure.
mean? I don't like to be afraid. And that's kind of my childhood, is like, I felt like I was, maybe everybody did. Like, I don't want to be too unique here in that I was afraid a lot.
Let me write this down. Fear makes you feel. Fear is scary. That's what we're going to title this podcast.
It is. And so then when you see like a little creeper, you know, in my mind of like fear, but then you're like, okay, you're actually part of me and you're trying to help me.
Yes.
It decreases the scary.
Well, we're going to talk about the parts in a second, and the parts, the perfectionist, the fear, the anxious one, because I'm going to pull another thing in here in a second.
Okay.
Millie, anything before I move on to the next one?
Are you?
No, but I'm a note.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
I
you're
like
worse
this
than I am. I know you well enough to know that you take more notes than I do.
To say she's doing so much work over here, and I want to be like,
Oh,
what would you
no,
just
I'm-
write down?
I'm writing down what you say so that I can just be reminded of what Jack Cornfield said.
Okay.
Yes.
No, I'm a note. I would, if I was given a well, inspiration in whatever form, whether it's this or anything else, I would write it down so that
Do you
I
have
stick it
one
somewhere.
big Word document where you have all your lessons of life somewhere, or is it scattered?
I do have a couple of notes inside my phone that
Yes.
I add quotes to
Mhm.
and just learnings, you know,
Mhm.
from podcasts or whatever that I like to keep
Visit
together.
from time to time.
Yeah.
Okay. Step 5. Here we go.
Then you can question your thoughts. And this is more the beautifully spelled out by Byron Katie, for example, who has these practices of questioning your thought. Says, what if that thought isn't true?
Yeah.
How can you know that thought is true? And if you look deeply, you can't know it. And you get to a place of realizing that your thoughts are tentative. They're a creation. And you say, thank you for trying to protect me. And again, you become the witness of those thoughts.
Sweetie, anything?
Yeah, I would say that one, I not only, we, as you said, we talk about these things all the time. The thing I appreciate about that one is sometimes when I find myself going down a rabbit hole of thought where I think about something and then I'm like, and then this will mean this and this will mean this, and then I'll have to do this. And all of a sudden I'm like in this huge, you can view it either as a tornado going up or as a rabbit hole going down. Either way, it's not great. That I actually have a much better practice of saying, I can scrap this whole thing because I just made it all up.
Yeah.
Like instead of then being anxious about that, I really am like, or none of that's happening at all. And I can just put it aside. I'm not saying the whole anxiety goes away, but I think a big part of self-awareness is noticing when you're reeling. That really just being like, how did I get to this thought? And recognizing that the first thought you had may have been based on something real. Maybe you saw something, read something, your kid said something. It may have been based on it, but you really don't know.
Yeah.
And you've created a whole story. And I think the ability to say, I'm going to scrap this whole story. And you know where I practice that the most? And I will be honest, I haven't meditated in probably 7 days, because it was too hard before Cameron was going. Cause I was like, I'm already way focused that when I would sit down, I would just cry. And I'm like, this isn't helping. But normally if I sit in meditation, that's where I notice thoughts. And I'm like, because I'm in meditation, I get to scrap this whole thing. So you practice the ability to let go of that tornado.
Yeah.
Then you try and take that into everyday life, which is a practice in itself.
Right.
So that one, I think, of everything you've said, is the one that to me is really possible for all us beings.
Got it. So you like step 5?
I do.
Questioning your thoughts.
I do.
Millie, anything on step 5?
I'm just thinking throughout all these steps, self-awareness, which is what you guys taught me, what is it, 11 years ago, that this whole path of self-awareness, I feel like that is a theme through awareness and self-awareness, but just being aware is half the battle.
Absolutely.
So that, because I have said out loud, okay, help me step away from the ledge, like I know I'm getting there to the ledge. And so being aware that I'm there at the ledge is literally half the battle.
Well, one of my teachers who wrote a book called 15 Commitments to Conscious Leadership, he said, you could throw my whole book away, and the only 2 things you need to know is awareness and acceptance. So if you can be aware of what is, and then accept yourself for whatever shows up, anxiety, fear, sadness, and accept that, there's no possibility of transformation without acceptance.
Well, and to Millie's point, just to like really hammer that point, any of this work that we talk about is not possible unless you notice yourself.
Yeah.
It's why that work of even pain, like, this can start with body work. Like, do you notice your hand tingling? Do you notice yourself? Like, we can be so lost in our thoughts. We can be so cut off from our bodies that we really think that everything that we're thinking is exactly what's happening. Yeah. Or, when we start to push it out, where we're like, the only reason I'm feeling or experiencing anything is because of you, where we make it about someone else or the circumstance, versus the story I was just telling all of you about, my daughter, when, if I'm worried about her not telling me something, I'm stressed because of my history. Yeah. It's not because of her.
And it requires curiosity, self-reflection.
Yeah, to even
notice that this is not about my kid. This is about me when I was 10.
And my clients will always say, but could it be about your kid? Well, sure, but not to the level of terror that I'm feeling. The terror in my body is my history.
Right. So you get a stimulus.
Yes.
And the stimulus is, we're dropping our kid off at college.
Correct.
But if the reaction is 10 times what the stimulus is, that's when there's an opportunity to be like, oh, this might not just be about this thing.
Right. What is our AA thing? History is...
your issues are in your tissues, that one?
But there was another one that I always said, Shane is listening right now going, Cathy, it's this. You know which one I'm talking about. Hysterical is historical. Hysterical is historical.
Yeah.
So like and we're not calling women hysterical. This is any human being. When you feel like you are up to 11, it can be triggered by the event in front of you. But the experience you're having is coming from an experience. It's something in you where you are now re-experiencing something from your history. And that goes on and on and on. Like I have thought a million times, I have tackled that. I have dealt with that. And then another thing comes up and my body still, it has the same system where my first reaction is my history. And that the work of even just noticing that to Millie's point is, I would even give it 75% of the, if we're going to call it a battle, because if you don't notice it at all, then people are like, what are you talking about?
Sweetie, did you say if they go up to 11?
Uh-oh.
All the way up. You're on 10 on your guitar. Where can you go from there?
Where can you go?
Where?
I don't know.
Nowhere. Exactly. What we do is if we need that extra push over the cliff, you know what we do?
Put it up to 11.
11. Exactly. One louder.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
So
Well,
that's
All right. Final step. You ready?
Ready.
Step 6.
Then a few more very simple things that you can do. You can find where you feel the anxiety most strongly in your body. And once you feel it, you can feel into its elements. Is it hot or cold? Is it hard or soft? Is it vibrating? The earth, air, fire. So you really get close into it. You can ask it what stories it tells, because it'll have a story. And then you say, again, not only thank you for trying to protect me, but you wrap it with kindness, with loving awareness, and say, thank you. I know you're worried. I can respect you and hold you with kindness and compassion. And you know that that's not who you are. This is a part, it's something, it's common for human beings. You say, I respect this, and who I am is honoring you and so much bigger than who you are. And you feel yourself literally being both the witness, the grounded one, the I know you, I see you, Mara, and you become more the Buddha rather than the one who's caught by all these things.
What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. I historically, I love body work or somatic, understanding when it comes to feelings. And I used to, when the kids were really little, everything was in my sternum. Remember, Todd, I used to feel like so much pain in my sternum.
Yeah.
It was pain, like you couldn't touch it. And that was usually grief coming out. And who knows? I don't want to act like I really understand everything. All I know is where I can feel the pain. Now, interestingly, the grief that I've been experiencing the last couple of weeks is my back. It's my shoulders. So that's kind of new for me because I tend to be a gut chest person. Like it's either in my stomach or my heart. So the back has been new for me. And I don't question it. It's just, that's where I'm feeling my, where do you get your, where do you feel in your body, your fear or whatever?
Probably in my shoulders and chest.
Yeah.
And I'll pivot from fear over to sadness, which is one that I've judged myself quite a bit as not having access to. And I feel very blessed to say that I experienced sadness through tears a few days before we dropped off Cameron. So it didn't happen when we left her in Iowa City. Instead, it happened 3 or 4 days beforehand. And I felt it in my throat. It started there and then went up to my face. And then I just started not wailing, but really having a nice, good cry. And it felt so like when it was happening, I was so happy.
So, but I want to and I totally hear you. I don't want to
are you about to criticize my crying, sweetie?
Yeah. I'm like, but did you do it this way? No, I think it's beautiful that you were crying. But sometimes this is what I was talking about, where you're like, it felt so good.
It did.
Okay. See, I don't feel
because you do it all the freaking time. I'm envious of you because you have this openness about you. So if I'm walking through the desert and I'm looking for water and then no water on day 1, no water on day 10, no water on day 50. And then on day 60, there's some water. I'm happy. The same way I've cried once a year in the last few years. I've used to judge myself a lot more critically, but I still do a little bit. So when it was happening, I was like, was I joyful? It did. I don't want to say it hurt.
It's like you're talking about two different things. The mind is saying to you, I'm so glad that I'm crying right now. But it does. And I get you. You're right. I cry all the time. And so the release, but I think I get frustrated about, I was sad and it felt so good. I'm like, no, sad doesn't feel good. You can later feel.
Yeah, it didn't feel good from the place it was happening in my throat and my tears.
Yeah.
That felt uncomfortable.
Like a vomit.
It was a little bit of a vomit. There's another part of my brain, my body, something that was like, this is good. this is purposeful.
So Millie, if you cried in front of your kids, would they be like, what's going on? Or do they?
What type of frequency are you a crier in front of your
I'm
kids,
not,
Millie?
I don't, unfortunately, I feel like, I don't cry in front of my kids enough.
Mhm. Some nice judgment there. Some self-judgment.
No,
Nice
just,
job.
I mean, because and first of all, I wanted to say that I know, Todd, that you were just grateful that you were able to tap into that part of you. And that's what you meant by
Sure.
feeling good.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
No way did it feel
Yeah,
good,
yeah.
but that you were just grateful for
Right.
it.
You're going to want Millie to be here all the time. She's going to be like, Todd.
Yeah, this is what you meant.
Exactly. Go ahead.
Because the times that I end up feeling sad are not they end up not being times when they're around.
Yeah.
There have been times where my eyes tear up a little bit and I'm thinking of something, and I will even say out loud, "Oh, I'm thinking about your granddad, and I'm just feeling a little sad." Sometimes, one kid, actually, my one son, who is pretty empathetic, he will say, "Mom, are you sad, or are you?" He might notice, the wet eyes or something, but no, most of the time they don't. My kids don't notice. So I don't know what you were just wondering why, if I'm able to do this in front of my kids. I would like to,
and
more.
Yeah, and I don't even know if we need to be like, "Look, kids, I'm crying." Like, it's not a show.
It's modeling what you want your kids to do.
It is, but it also needs to be authentic to us.
True.
Like, if people were like, "I need to cry and show my kids I cry," then there's much more of an honesty about, I struggle to cry, or kids, a lot of times when I cry, I don't do it around you. And I know that it would be okay if I did. Like, there is no way we're supposed to do anything. I was just wondering if Millie was like a crier with her kids because of something that's happening with her kids, or if it's more about you're struggling with it on your own, like, and you have your own cry and then they come back home from school or whatever.
Yeah, I think the things that I end up getting emotional about, it comes at a time, where I'm usually alone, because it's got to be quiet.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm reflecting. So they're just usually not around.
Well, and I'll say, there's no should, sweetie, but if somebody is, I'll just make up an example, prohibiting themselves from crying in front of, I'll say a dad doesn't want to cry in front of his son because he thinks it's weak. I would be like, that's probably not the best modeling.
Let me say this though. You know how I'm going to use the vomiting thing again. Do you guys like vomiting in front of people? I don't. Like, sometimes someone's nice enough to hold back my hair or whatever, but it's kind of a private, personal, like, this feels really out of control. Yeah. Crying is the same thing. When we were at lunch, one of our last lunches last week, when it was all of us and I didn't like that it was one of our last lunches, because I had been counting down all summer being like, we have so many lunches, we have so many brunches, we have so many dinners. So I didn't worry about it. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden we're literally on our last one. Yeah. We were at First Watch.
Yeah. Right.
And I didn't have any plan to, but I started to cry. And it's not like crying it's not a movie. It's gross. You're like, and I did feel uncomfortable for everybody that I was having that reaction, because everybody stops. Right. It's like you just threw up at the table.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like, everybody stops. So you're stopping the conversation from happening. Just so you know, I'm completely okay with you crying, whether it's in the kitchen or at a restaurant. But that doesn't mean the other 4 people that were at the table with us did.
And that doesn't mean I am.
Right.
Because I think sometimes when we're like, Cathy, you cry all the time. I do, but it's sometimes like a commercial and I have tears and then we move on. A real grief cry
that's different.
Is super uncomfortable. Sure. And you feel vulnerable, and I'll even use these words that we should weak, like I can't contain, out of control, and you are just like showing your insides to everybody, and then it's hard to bring it back, because then everyone's like looking at it's why we don't. So Todd, I agree with you that we shouldn't feel embarrassed, but for the criers out there, there is a piece of there's a reason why we get uncomfortable. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
So. Are you crying? No crying. No crying in baseball.
All right. So the last thing, and this might
take your time.
Poor Millie. She's choking on Cathy's speech about crying.
I'm going to vomit.
She's going to emotionally vomit. This might be a preview for next week's podcast. I also listened to an interview with Richard Schwartz,
Richard Schwartz. Give me more information.
IFS.
Oh, yeah. IFS.
And I feel like
Internal Family Systems.
I have not yet read his book, but I think it's going to be the next book I read. I'm actually reading Outlive right now with Peter Attia.
Yeah.
But I think he wrote a whole book on internal family systems. And the way I experience the little bit that I know about his teaching is that there's these parts of us that we've talked about: the anxious one, the perfectionist, the joyful one, the angry one, the critic. And his whole teaching, as far as I can tell so far, is that there's all these little parts of us, and it doesn't encapsulate any of us. And I just want to play this clip that he shared. And I think would be kind of a good way to kind of encapsulate everything that we've talked about today.
Great.
All right.
This out, because speaking as someone who's came very close to taking his own life, this is a very, very, very big lens swap.
So Tim got coached or went through a process with Richard on Tim's podcast.
Okay.
And he was really impacted by the line of questioning that Richard led him through and said, this is really powerful, really good.
Yes.
So now Tim's just kind of doing a follow-up question after his process.
For someone who is suicidal or is suffering from suicidal ideation.
So it really does help to know that all these things aren't you. They're parts of you that often are just trying to protect. So for me, there aren't alcoholics. There aren't, I'm against all these monolithic labels, because yes, you've got a part that tries to protect you by getting you drunk all the time, but it's just a part of you. And it's one of your firefighters. And then most people don't realize that if they took away your drinking, suicide is the next one on the list, the next one on the ladder. And that would be jumping in, if not for the drinking. So then you got to honor the drinking part for keeping you alive.
So I just love that clip, because it's like, why would anybody be thankful if I'm an addict? Why would I be thankful for my drinking? And what he's saying is maybe the drinking is protecting you from doing something even worse to yourself.
Well, that's kind of, when we talk about addiction, it really is a reframe in that every addiction that we have was coping.
Yes.
Coping. It was
Right.
It was defensive. It was a coping mechanism. And a lot of times when it's something we stuck with, it was working. And again, someone may say it's not working because the drinking was causing a problem with your relationships, or the drinking was causing you to get up late for work. But that's a lot better than suicidal ideation.
Sure.
In some, or that's a lot better than dealing with the fact that I was abused. That's a lot better than dealing with the fact that my parent is berating me.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking about levels of being able to survive.
Yeah.
And so then it's why when I talk to my social work students about addiction and rehab, the thing I always say is rehab is just like there's a detoxing component, and there's also tools that you're learning, but you haven't started until you get home, because that's when you have to incorporate.
Yeah.
It's one thing when it's the same thing as if we take it off addiction and we talk about being on an inpatient unit or a partial hospitalization. You're learning the tools, you're surrounded, but then you have to come home and integrate those. And sometimes we have, connections where you go back and forth to the hospital, so you don't have to do it too quickly. But you have to learn how to incorporate these things. And they aren't, it's funny. I was just telling Millie upstairs that I'm watching Painkiller, which is about opioids.
Yeah.
And, all these people who became addicted to opioids because their doctors gave it to them, because Purdue told the salespeople to say it wasn't addictive. I mean, it's just this long line of blame. And these people who they're addicted to these pills, and everybody's like, get off them, get clean, and it's like, they can't, there's this. First, there's the level of using them and why it's for pain.
Yeah.
And then it's now my body can't survive without this.
Yeah.
So we could say that with a lot of coping mechanisms, Todd. Your body feels like it can't survive without shutting down.
Sure. Yeah. And that's why I need to, instead of judge myself or ostracize the numb one or the stoic one, say to it that it's here to protect me. And he used in that clip the term firefighter.
Yeah.
And I think what he means by firefighter, there are these parts of us.
It's an IFS terminology
that come to put out a fire. The problem is most of the time they come in a sideways fashion, or not the best. It's usually not the best way to fight that fire.
Well, there may not be a fire.
There may not even be a fire
It's
to
just
fight.
it thinks there
It's a
is.
made up story.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyways, yeah. And I just want to keep exploring Richard Schwartz because I think that I really appreciate how he helps people. I think it falls in line with how I want to show up.
I think IFS has been a very good, people have been pulling pieces from it forever, but I think just the understanding that we're parts.
Yes, just that
it gives us, it's very similar to what, when we talk about Buddhism or when we talk about mindfulness, is that this is just a thought. This is not you. When we talk about emotional agility, Susan David's work, this is just a feeling. I am feeling sad. It's not I am sad.
Yeah.
Like it's trying to
Separate.
remember that we are. And so then people say, well, what's the core of us? Where do we begin? And here's the mystery, right? This is where it gets a little, dicey, like what is the essence of us? Then?
Well, that's what I was going to use the word essence. Like when we're born, we're essence, we're love, we're God, we're universe or whatever. And then we just start carrying these bags.
Right.
Through our experience of being human.
And what is that?
What is love?
No. Todd, what is love?
Oh, no.
He's going to play it.
No,
Bill, he is. So do you feel like, I want to have you talk, but do you feel like you can talk with your throat?
I think so.
Okay.
No, I can't.
Okay.
Yeah, no, the firefighter analogy I thought was interesting, but actually I was taking notes throughout that. I feel like a lot of these concepts come back to awareness, acceptance, curiosity, and gratitude.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great roadmap for living.
Yeah.
Boom.
And boom.
And the gratitude one, how we were saying before about, in the moment we're grateful that sadness comes up or whatever comes up. Gratitude is something it's helpful to practice in the moment when you're having anxiety or whatever, and you can say, I'm grateful for this. But I think gratitude can also be a hindsight practice that still strengthens it. It's kind of like a hindsight practice becomes like lifting weights for the next time that it occurs. I'm saying this only because, again, when I'm sad, it's very hard for me to be like, yeah, but I'm grateful I'm sad. I feel like there's a little bit of a bypassing in the moment, whereas let's be sad and just have this out, have this vomit that's so uncomfortable. And then as you usually, especially after we have a good cry, we feel a little lighter. And then being like, that's when I can jump to, grief is love.
Yeah.
Like grief is, that's the love I feel for my daughter. I don't, I miss her. Or, sadness is, or anger is my way of recognizing my boundaries have been crossed, all those things. But it's hard I feel like gratitude is really helpful for me at night when I go through the day. How do you use it?
No, but just like you said, I think it's after the fact. I think there's no way that in the moment that I am grateful for the sad, for the fear, for the whatever. So that's why I think I went in that order too. Is like, first thing is you're aware of that sadness, the fear, the anxiety. Then you accept it.
Yeah.
And then you get curious about why you were fearful.
What does this emotion have to teach me?
Yes. And then in the end, whatever it is that, that you're grateful that it showed up, whether it's there to protect you or it's there for you to, discover something else about yourself, right? Or that relationship. But yes, definitely the gratitude comes to me. It comes later.
Well,
I'm not grateful for it in the moment necessarily.
Well, that's interesting. Like the way I teach emotions, the model that I was taught, which is great. All these emotions, sadness, fear, anger, joy, let's say, you got to notice them, you got to feel them, you got to express them, but there's some wisdom on the other side of each of these emotions. And sadness, something needs to be let go of. Fear means something needs to be known that is not known. Anger is there's a boundary that's been crossed. Joy means something needs to be celebrated. But I need to go through it and then get curious about what it's here to teach me.
Well, and this is what, you all know I'm infatuated with talking about or reading about or understanding cults or high control groups or even cliques and how, human behavior and how we get involved. And the reason why I am so interested besides my own personal experiences, one of the things they take from people is self-trust. Meaning that you're basically told this is your fault or what you're feeling, you shouldn't be feeling, or there's a gaslighting component. This can be true in an abusive relationship too. So if you lose self-trust, those 4 things you just said are very difficult because you're like, well, I don't really have an awareness. Tell me what's happening. You know, you don't, I had to work kind of back from that. Like, you know, being in experiences where I was depending on, you know, people to tell me, you know, this is what you're experiencing in body work. This is what you're feeling. This is what you can do. This happens with people who get way into astrology. I believe in astrology and the bigger picture of it. But if we're following a guide that somebody else is giving us, then these 4 things that Millie said, they're very hard to tap into because you're like, wait, am I feeling this? So what I find is when I listen to people's experiences who have come out of high control groups or have been very focused on a religious group or like I said, an abusive relationship, their work is really to gain back that I trust what I'm feeling. Because if you don't, then you can't, all of these things, you can't be grateful for it because then you don't even trust that what came up was a good thing for you. Yeah. There's such a core component there.
No doubt.
You know, so anyway.
All right. So we're going to close shop here. I want to say thanks to Millie Shee for joining us today. I'm going to give you
Thank you guys. Boy, what a surprise.
Thank you, Millie.
Initially, we were like, we'll bring you on for 5 minutes.
Yeah, we're just bringing you in for the little thing. I want to thank Jeremy Kraft. He's a bald-headed beauty. If you live in Chicago and you need any type of home improvement project, painting, remodeling, give him a call, 630-956-1800. Don't forget about Team Zen. If you want to see Millie on Team Zen, join Team Zen.
That'll be our new tagline. Come meet Millie.
Come meet Millie. $25 a month, cancel at any time. And as far as the title of this podcast, sweetie, it's either going to be 6 Steps to Lessen Anxiety or Fear is Scary.
Fear is scary.
Quote unquote by Cathy Cassani
I know,
Adams.
it's a deep one.
And instead of our regular music taking us home, we're going to let Milk sing a little Black Sheep.
Nice.
So thank you, Millie.
Oh, thank you guys. This was fun.
We'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Dear Black Sheep, it runs deep, it's insatiable, that hunger to be seen and to be understood. Black sheep, they call me that too. I wrestled with the dark, but